Vishayendriya samyogat yattadagre amrutopamam pariname vishamiva tatsukam rajasam smritam. The 38th Shloka of the 18th chapter, Mokṣha Sanyāsa Yoga. Krishna deals with the description of sukha that is rajasic in nature. We are in the midst of discovering the art and science of successful actions. Krishna breaks down an action into various components, analyzes each and every component. After analyzing various ingredients that go into making a successful action, he then takes up the topic of the outcome of the action. After all, any action is performed for the sake of a goal, and eventually the goal of all goals is to experience happiness. Any action that is carried out, therefore, is performed with the object of experiencing happiness, sukha. Krishna takes up the topic of sukha, which is the goal of every action that is performed, and analyzes sukha. Sukha is also threefold in nature. Sukham tvidanim trividham shunume bharatarshava. Abhyasad ramate yatra dukkhantam cha nigacchati, he says. Hey Bharatarshava, even sukham is threefold in nature. Hear from me. Let me explain to you that happiness is also threefold in nature. Sukham tvidanim trividam shunume bharatarshava. Abhyasad ramate yatra dukkhantam cha nigacchati. He says, listen to me, hey Arjuna. The threefold nature of happiness in which one delights, one experiences. Abhyas, through practice, he says. Through sustained practice. Abhyasad ramate yatra. One delights in experiencing this threefold sukha through practice, or we can also take it, the adjective of ramate, for abhyasa as well. Practice that is delightful. Sadhana that is delightful in nature. By sustained practice, one experiences sukha and eventually one attains a state where there is no dukkha. Dukkhantam na nigacchati, he says. Essentially, every sadhana that is performed is for the sake of attaining that state where dukkha comes to an end. The ultimate state is the state of moksha, which is beyond any miseries. The place which is beyond any misery is Vaikuntha, where there is no misery whatsoever. Now, Krishna then takes up in the 37th shloka the first classification which we discussed in detail in the last session. Sattvika sukha. Yattadagre vishamiva pariname amrutopamam. Tatsukam satvikam proktam atma buddhi prasadajam. Sattvika sukha is that sukha which initially may seem poisonous. There could be initial pain. Apparently, it may be not agreeable to begin with, but eventually it is nectarine. It's a pariname amrutopamam. By nature, sattvika sukha is nectarine, but it may seem poisonous, he says. It may seem not so agreeable. And that sattvika sukha is born of atma buddhi. Atma Buddhi Prasadajam, tranquility of the mind that helps us realize our true nature, experience our own self. Sukha is, the ultimate sukha is experiencing our own true nature. The Upanishad declares, Anando Brahmeti Vyajanat, Anandadyeva Kalvimani Bhutani Jayante, Anandena Jatani Jivanti, Anandam Prayanti Avisamvishanti. The Bhrigu of Taittiriya Upanishad categorically declares that the Parabrahman Narayana is the embodiment of Ananda. Bliss. Supreme bliss is the very nature of that Parabrahman. He is the very embodiment of Ananda. And it is from that bliss, verily all things, all beings are born. And all the beings are sustained by that very bliss. And when they depart, they attain that very bliss. Therefore, we are all parts of that Brahman, which is supreme bliss, which is the very embodiment of bliss. So by our very nature is to be blissful. Our very nature is to be blissful. At the very core, we are happy. The happiness that we seek is all about knowing what we are and not about what we have. By nature, we are complete. Purnatva is our very nature. We have no lack whatsoever. We are beyond all imperfections. But in the world of samsara, as long as the Atman is caught in the cycle of samsara, one does not realize this true nature. Even in this samsara, we are nourished, sustained by that supreme bliss. Now, imagine if we were to walk and run all throughout our life with only one leg. We would always be in a state of instability, struggling all the time. And we would be longing for stability. We would always be longing. And our natural state is to be two-legged. But let's say one leg is tied all the time and we have to walk and run with only one leg. We will be seeking stability all the time. We would be struggling. It is not going to be easy to be doing all activity with just one leg. We would always be in a state of discomfort and there is that longing to be stable. Similarly, we are by nature blissful. And when we are in this samsaric world, we are seeking, we are nourished by that very bliss and we are seeking to reach our natural state of supreme bliss. But unfortunately, because of this association with Prakriti, the access to our source of unending bliss, the access suddenly is lost. As long as we are connected to the source, we have complete access to unlimited bliss. When this connection is lost, that's when there is a struggle. So we need to understand that the ills of samsara, the struggles that we go through, is not our natural state. We are in an unnatural state. Because we are not aligned with our nature. All the sadhanas that our shastras teach us is about bringing this alignment. When the body, mind, intellect, prana is aligned with the Atman and the Atman is aligned with the Paramatman, we are in a supremely blissful state. When there is misalignment, then we start to experience distress, experience unhappiness. And when we talk of happiness, the word happiness takes several forms. Happiness Essentially, it's experiencing sweetness in life and living. Because after all, our nature is bliss and it is our right to experience our own nature. But we do not experience our own nature continuously all throughout. There are fleeting moments when we do end up experiencing ourselves. There are fleeting moments when we do end up experiencing our relationship with Krishna. There are fleeting moments when we do experience Krishna himself, knowingly or unknowingly. Those are the moments of true happiness, which we do not easily recognize. When we say happiness, happiness can take three forms: pleasure, joy, bliss. Now, this categorization is not ironclad. It is more for us to understand how happiness arises, what form it takes, and how it can be sustained. Now, how do we understand pleasure? Now, there is happiness at the physical level. Now, we run our lives based on the maxim of Ishta Prapti Anishta Nivritti. This is the maxim which runs our lives. Ishta Prapti Anishta Nivritti. Ishta, what we like. Prapti, attainment. Attainment of what we like. Anishta, what we dislike. Nivritti, somehow remove things which we dislike. Now, Ishta Prapti Anishta Nivritti. When this happens, the outcome is happiness. When there is Anishta Prapti Anishta Nivritti, the outcome is unhappiness. When the object of our liking is physical, when our liking is towards worldly object, then the outcome is pleasure. Pleasure is at the level of physical experience. It's at the physical level. Any sense gratification results in pleasure. When there is a material desire, a desire for possessing an external object, and when that desire is fulfilled, then what we experience is pleasure. Now, this pleasure, therefore, is dependent on externals. This pleasure is dependent on externals. And this pleasure is also short-lived, because what is external is also short-lived. This pleasure is also subject to change, because what is external is also subject to change. And when we seek from something which is temporary, when we seek something permanent from something which is temporary, then we are set up for disappointment, dissatisfaction and frustration. We are basically searching for that which we need to be permanent at a wrong place, which is temporary and fleeting. Pleasure, therefore, is Ishta Prapti and Anishta Nivritti at the physical realm. It is bodily gratification. And because the capacity for the body to experience sweet happiness is very, very limited, pleasure is also very, very limited. Now, when the experience is at the level of the mind, it can be called joy. Because this joy, which is a mental experience, the duration is relatively longer than the physical experience. The happiness that comes at the physical level when there is bodily gratification is very fleeting, few moments. It just comes and goes. Sometimes we possibly may not even realize, because it's so very fleeting in nature. At the level of the mind, joy can be slightly longer in duration. Now, when we achieve something, when there is a goal and then we achieve the goal, when there is an accomplishment of sorts, when something is agreeable to our mind, which kind of brings our mind to a state of relative calm, then we experience joy. And that joy gives us, ensures that we are able to extend the connection within for a longer time. It is all about how long the connection stays. The connection between us and him. And when there is a connection, the duration of the connection is longer, the time period of our experience is also longer. Now, obviously, there is a flip side to joy also. Joy always comes with sorrow. Joy and sorrow are twin brothers. They are packaged together. There is the one without the other, we cannot find it. In samsara, joy and sorrow are twins, always come together. Pain and pleasure always come together. We cannot expect to have only pain or only pleasure. They are always packaged together, twin brothers. Two sides of the same coin. We cannot say I need one and not the other. Therefore, beyond pleasure and pain, beyond joys and sorrows, there is happiness which is called bliss. That happiness, that bliss is our natural state. That is our quality. That is what we possess. Now, for this bliss, there is no need, there is no condition. It's unconditional. It is not dependent on anything external. For joy, for pleasure, there is dependence on externals. There is a condition. Condition has to be fulfilled. Whereas for bliss, there is no condition. It's unconditional. It's our innate nature. There is no need for any desire to be fulfilled. There is no need for any goal to be attained. That's our natural state. Our natural state gets revealed when the mind becomes tranquil. That is the state of bliss. So Krishna, therefore, takes up sukha and he talks about how sukha, depending on the dominance of guna, can be at various levels. Sukha can be only at the level of physical. It can be physical level, bodily gratification. It can be at the mental level, and it can be beyond the mental level as well. Evam pravartitam chakram nanuvartayati hayaha aghayurindriya ramaha mogham praktasa jivati, Krishna declares. No, there is one segment of the third chapter of the Gita where Krishna really gives us bullet points in terms of how to lead a successful life. He gives so many points in terms of how can we lead happy, successful lives. And a very important shloka in that segment is the shloka where Krishna talks about Aghayurindriya Ramaha, Indriya Ramaha, which essentially refers to most of us, or in fact all of us. Indriya Rama, one who leads a life driven by one's senses. Indriyara, evam pravartitam chakram, Krishna says. Nanu vartayati hayaha aghayurindriya. Agha ayu. A life of sin, he says. Agha ayu. Agha is sin. Ayuhu, life. One who is driven by the senses, driven to fulfill one's own bodily needs alone. He is Indriya Ramaha, Mogham Partha Sajivati. Partha Mogham Jivati. Mogha, useless. One leads a useless life, he says. That life, the opportunity given, is completely misused. It's a useless. Who is that Indriya Rama? Evam pravartitam chakram nanuvartayati hayaha. One who does not follow the chakra, the life, the cycle of life, he says, which is nothing but the principle of yajna, which is the cycle of giving and taking. Selflessly giving more than taking less, giving more. It's a cycle. Receiving has to necessarily be preceded by giving. The more we give, the more we receive, and it's a cycle, and it goes on. This is the cycle of creation. Every other living being complies with the cycle except human beings. And human beings end up being Indriya Ramaha. When we reflect on the way we lead our lives, we see that there is a constant war. There's a constant tussle between two sides of our existence. There is one side which is purpose seeking. There is another side which is pleasure seeking. And there is a conflict between these two all the times. All of us have these two sides. There is a purpose seeking side and there is a pleasure seeking side. And depending on what wins, we end up doing things. If the pleasure seeking side wins, we end up caving in to our material desires very easily. If the purpose seeking side wins, we end up doing meaningful, purposeful activities. If we have to do anything purposeful and meaningful, we have to necessarily sacrifice pleasure. Simple example. If I need to study one chapter of the Gita today, I have to necessarily sacrifice possibly watching half an hour of TV. I cannot do both. I can only do either of them. There is a conflict here. There is a purpose-seeking side, and I know that I have to. It is not that I do not know. There is a purpose-seeking side, I know, because without this, I find my day meaningless, purposeless. I'm seeking some meaning in my life all the time, and I know that when I do some activities, I do see meaning in life. I do see purpose in life. So there is one part of me which is constantly seeking purpose. And there is another part of me which is pulling me all the time towards pleasure seeking. And it's this war, this tussle. So that when my buddhi is nourished with Shastra Jnana, then I value my pleasures, my purpose-seeking side more. When my buddhi is not nourished, when my manas takes over and rules, I am always dragged towards pleasure-seeking side. Therefore, Aghayu Rama, Indriya Rama is one. If you have to understand Indriya Rama, he is one like a driver who is driving a car. Imagine we are driving a car on a highway, expressway, Sheikh Zayed Road, driving at 100 kilometers per hour. And then suddenly we see something so very tempting, then we immediately put the brake and stop to see that. What would happen? It's going to be a chaos, destruction on the road. Not only self-destruction, it will going to create chaos on the road. Caving in to a temptation, a pleasure, and essentially it is like living for the moment. Living for the moment. Now, Shastras do talk about living in the moment. No, we have heard of masters talking about one should live in the moment. There is a huge difference. Living in the moment and living for the moment. Living in the moment is like driving in the moment. When I'm driving the car, I have to drive in the moment. I have to be focused on the road. I have to be clear about the rules of the road. I have to abide by the laws, and I should know the direction towards I'm going, and I should know my destination. So therefore, driving in the moment, living in the moment is like driving in the moment. The regrets of the past, the fears of the future should not distract me. Should be focused on the present, and therefore living in the moment is so very important. Whereas living for the moment means caving into temptations, being driven by pleasure seeking. We need to understand that it is human characteristic, a unique human characteristic, to trade in the present for the future. To trade in the present pleasure for the future good. This is a human characteristic. Only the human beings have this unique characteristic. All living beings eat, sleep, procreate, protect. All living beings do. Humans can do something more. Humans alone can do something more. Humans can regulate these impulses. Impulses to eat, impulses to sleep, impulses to protect, impulses to procreate. Humans alone can regulate, manage, and master these impulses. And thereby trade the present pleasure for a future good. In fact, any progress, not just spiritual progress, even material progress requires this trading. Trading the present pleasure for a future good. Even material progress. If I need to make $1 million, I need to trade in my present pleasure and work hard towards something which is for future good. So material progress is also requires this characteristic of trading. More so ever when it comes to spiritual progress. Now, imagine it was Newton who saw an apple falling. Now, Newton saw apple falling from the tree. Newton obviously traded the present pleasure for a future good. If it was a monkey which would have seen the apple falling, it would have grabbed the apple, would have nicely eaten. Newton traded the present pleasure of eating the apple to a future good of discovering gravity. If this trading, if this capacity to trade is lacking, then we become Indriya Ramaha. Indriya Rama is one who cannot trade the present, the drive, the impulse for immediate gratification, for future good. And when the life is run based on impulses, when the life is based on caving into immediate gratification, there cannot be greater good. And that is the reason why Krishna takes up the topic of Sukha after analyzing actions in detail is to highlight once again the need for actions being sattvic in nature. Because if the actions are not sattvic in nature, the outcome is not going to be sattvic in nature. The Sukha is not going to be sattvic in nature. We need to understand the difference between pleasure, joy, and bliss. And we need to understand that bliss is our right, and we need the opportunity of life is given to be nourished, sustained by bliss, and to eventually attain that state of bliss. Anando brahmeti vyajanad anandadyeva kalvimani bhutani jayante anandena jatani jivanti anandam prayanti abhisamvishanti. Therefore, Rajasic pleasure, Rajasic Sukha is that Sukha which is not bliss, it is pleasure. Krishna then comes to the definition of Rajasic Sukha. Vishayendriya Samyoga. Vishayendriya Samyoga Yattadagre Amrutopamam Pariname Vishamiva Tat Sukham Rajasam Smritam. When we looked at Sattvika Sukha, it is exactly the opposite. Sattvika Sukha is exactly the opposite. Yattadagre Vishamiva Pariname Amrutopamam. What seems poisonous but is actually nectarine is Sattvika Sukha. Exactly the opposite. What seems nectarine but is actually poison is Rajasic Sukha. Vishayendriya Samyoga. That Sukha which is the Samyoga of Vishayendriyas. Vishaya Indriya. Vishaya objects of senses. The world is full of Vishaya. All the material objects, the worldly objects. Objects of all our senses. Indriyas, our senses. Vishayendriya Samyoga. In the 6th chapter, Krishna clearly points out what is real Sukha. Sukham atyantikam yattat buddhigrahyam atindriyam, Krishna says. This is so profound definition. He says, Sukham Sukham atyantikam, supreme sukha, supreme. What is supreme happiness? Sukham atyantikam yattad buddhigrahyam atindriyam. The supreme happiness is that happiness which is realized, experienced through a pure mind, a crystal clear mind, independent of indriyas. Atindriyam. So therefore, any experience through the indriyas cannot bring real sukha. And he says, buddhigrahyam. Buddhi is needed. No, buddhi can work two ways. Buddhi can prevent experience of real happiness. Buddhi can also facilitate. When the buddhi is clear, when it is purified, when it is pure, then it becomes a tool. Then it becomes a tool to experience. That's why he says, buddhigrahyam atindriyam. That's sukha. Now, another way to understand, while Krishna did not mean this in the 6th chapter, but after we finish the next 6 chapters, we understand this even better. Sukham atyantikam, supreme sukha, buddhigrahyam atindriyam. Atindriya here is independent of indriyas or dependent on the atindriya. Who is atindriya? Vedyo Vaidyas Sadayogi Viraha Madhavo Madhuhu Atindriyo Mahamayo Mahotsaho Mahavalaha. Bhagavan is also Atindriya. Buddhigrahyam Atin. With the buddhi which is pure, when we connect with Atindriya, Sukham Atyantikam, we experience supreme Sukha. When we are connected with Krishna, we experience Sukha. When we are disconnected from Krishna, we experience Dukkha. Simple definition. And Rajas ensures that we stay disconnected from Krishna. Why? Because Rajas is always in a mode where we are focused externally. Vishayendriya samyogad. The Indriyas are constantly seeking to engage with the external world. When Rajas dominates the mind, the Indriyas are always seeking to engage with the external world. The mind is always agitated because of Rajas, and the mind is in the process of trying to fulfill all the desires at any given point in time. That's why the agitation is. It's not about one desire. There are so many desires, and the mind wants to fulfill all desires. Every desire is shouting, and with all the shouting match that is going on, the senses are trying to engage randomly based on all these loud desires in the mind. And when the senses engage with the sense objects, Vishayendriya Samyoga, it may so happen that that particular desire which is shouting for that object, that particular desire can become slightly calmer. The loudness may come down for the moment, and we end up thinking it is that object which actually gave us that happiness. Whereas it is not the object that gave us the happiness, it was only because the desire was loud, shouting for that object. When the moment we tried to fulfill that desire, for that fleeting few moments, the decibel levels of the desire came down, and immediately we think that that object gave us that happiness. When the decibel level of the desire comes down, we are able to experience a tiny weeny spark of our own happiness, our own natural state, and then we immediately think it is that object that gave us happiness. Vishayendriya Samyoga. Now the problem is, Rajasic Sukha is so very fleeting. Pleasure is so very fleeting. Why? Because of two reasons. One, the pleasure is dependent on Vishaya, which is external, and that Vishaya, the capacity for that Vishaya to provide happiness is only very limited, because that Vishaya itself is constantly changing. What can be agreeable to me today, same thing cannot be agreeable tomorrow. It is subject to the law of perishability. And second, while the Vishaya has its limitations, I also have a limitation of this desire is constantly, it is not, even if I fulfill it once, it's not going to go away. It's going to come back with vengeance again. I think by just fulfilling it once, I'm able to put it away. This is the mistake that is often done. By fulfilling a desire, we think we are successfully quenching the thirst, but we are, on the contrary, we are actually adding fuel to the fire. Every time a desire is fulfilled, the desire is going to grow manifold. The more number of times we fulfill a desire, the stronger the desire is going to be. It's going to become a craving, a conflagration that cannot be put off. And therefore, what is going to happen? The agitation in the mind is not going to go away. That is the reason why the pleasure is so very fleeting. The one moment it will seem like the agitation has come down, the other moment the agitation is going to go up, and immediately the pleasure turns into pain. The other problem of a Rajasic mind, the Rajasic mind essentially looks at the world and divides the world into two. This is what a Rajasic mind does. It divides the world into two parts, two categories. One part is what I have, the other part is what I don't have. This is how a Rajasic mind looks at the world. The world is essentially divided into two. A tiny part, a small part is what I have. There is a huge part which I don't have, which means the Rajasic mind is constantly focused on what I don't have. And the desires always is trying to fulfill the desire of wanting to have something which I do not possess. The focus is always on that part which I do not have, and it's a long list. It's an unending list. As long as Rajas dominates the mind, this is going to be the case. And when Rajas dominates the mind, what is going to happen is we are constantly reflecting on our condition. And our condition is defined by what we have that can give us happiness, that can fulfill our desires. Now, therefore and when we look and we see what we have is always limited, there is only so much that we can possess. And everything that we possess is subject to the law of diminishing returns. Initially, the possession, when it is new, brings us some pleasure. And over a period of time, the pleasure starts to decrease exponentially. And at some point in time, it doesn't matter, it just remains a possession. It only matters when we lose. Until then, that possession is as good as not having, because the utility of that possession to give us that needed pleasure is so very low. So therefore, we are constantly looking at what we don't have. Now, the condition is defined by what we have, and we are trying to always improve this condition without realizing that whatever we do to improve our condition of having things, whatever we do is not going to bring us happiness, because instead of we are addressing the wrong area. Instead of addressing our condition, we should be addressing our conditioning. Our conditioning is our vasanas. While our condition of having things can improve or not improve, our conditioning is always to go and possess something. Now, if we don't address this is the root cause of all our problems. Our conditioning, we are conditioned to believe that I have to always strive and attain something new every day. Isn't that so? We are programmed. Every day, we are constantly looking out to attain something. It can be physical, it can be relation, object, entity, whatever. It is all about having, possessing, getting something all the time. That's our natural. This is because of Rajas. Vishayendriya samyogat. the samyoga between Vishaya and Indriya. The samyoga is this engagement of our Indriyas with the Vishayas. This constant engagement is ensuring that we stay focused, we stay conditioned on going after having things, and at the same time, without addressing this, we are only trying to look at our condition, say, I only have so much, I need to have so much more so that I can become more happy. If only we slightly fine tune and say, irrespective of what I have, if I somehow address my conditioning of not hankering for more and more things, all of a sudden, when we stop that or when we moderate that, all of a sudden, life seems to be a lot more happier. Our condition may not improve. We may remain financially at the same level. We may think that only when we start growing financially all the time, we will stay happy. This is like trying to improve our condition. Why? Because our conditioning of going after, accumulating is not being addressed. Now, if we fine tune that conditioning, all of a sudden, when that rajas is controlled, is mastered, and we become more sattvic, all of a sudden, we start realizing it is not about what we have, it is about what we are. That huge difference between what we are and what we have becomes so very glaring. And only then we start experiencing sattvika sukha. Until then, it is rajasic sukha. Vishayendriya samyoga. Yattadagre amrutopamam. Now, what is amrita? What is fascinating at the beginning becomes frustrating at the end. Pariname vishamiva. Now we may ask, how can the same thing be both fascinating and frustrating? How can the same, either it has to be fascinating or it has to be frustrating. But if we really look at the world, everything that is worldly has to alternate. There is nothing which will remain fascinating in this world. Because it is subject to the law of impermanence, subject to the law of perishability, subject to the law of fragility. So therefore, what is seemingly fascinating at the beginning will become frustrating, no doubt about it. It is only a problem when we don't understand this. That is why pleasure becomes pain immediately, because we think what is fascinating at the beginning will remain fascinating all the time. The only thing which remains fascinating all the time is only Bhagavan. Everything else. So, therefore, and why that what is fascinating is pleasurable to begin with? When something is fascinating, at that moment of fascination, my mind gets a little calmer and I experience that pleasure. And therefore, yes, it is fascinating. But then, the body and the senses have limitations. There is only so much capacity to experience. The mind can imagine wildly. And the mind has wild imaginations. Whatever be the imagination of the mind, there is a limitation for the senses and the body. There is only so much capacity. I can only eat possibly 2 laddus, 3 laddus, 4 laddus. I'm taking up the example. There is a limitation. The mind can imagine that, eating 100 laddus is so very blissful because laddu by itself is, but after 2 laddus, 3 laddus, the body will start saying, stop, please, it will start begging. There is a limitation. For any sensory pleasure, any kind of sensory pleasure, any engagement of Vishaya with Indriya, there is a limitation of capacity. And we cannot expect a limited vehicle to give us unlimited happiness. We cannot expect a Toyota to run like a Rolls Royce and a Rolls Royce to run like an aircraft. No, the vehicle that we have, the body, has limitations. So, the limit, on the one hand, there is a vehicle which has limitations. On the other hand, the mind, which is supposed to be managing this vehicle, suddenly has limitlessness when it comes to desires. Every desire becomes limitless in its scope because it seems to be never extinguished, and the number of desires are limitless. So on the one hand, the mind which is managing the body and the senses is in a different plane. The body and the senses through which one has to experience is in a different plane. This is an excruciating combination, because this is a combination which will never give real happiness. Always there is going to be pain, there is going to be sorrow. Whatever we seek through this mechanism is only going to be disastrous. That is why Krishna says, Pariname Vishamiva. Parinama. Always when we do any action, Parinama, the consequence, the eventuality, what is the ultimate object needs to be taken into account. Tat Sukham Rajasam Smritam. So thus Krishna differentiates Rajasic Sukha from Sattvika Sukha. We can by now easily conclude what Tamasic Sukha can mean. Tamasic Sukha essentially is not Sukha at all. It is delusion. It is Moha. It is the other extreme. A Moha where we think it is Sukha, but it is what we can call as miserable pleasure or pleasurable misery. That is Tamasic Sukha. That is why he says, Nidralasya pramadottam tat tamasam udahritam. Nidralasya pramadottam. Nidra, alasya, pramada. Sleep, sloth, laziness, procrastination, indolence. Pramada. Pramada, intoxication, carelessness, recklessness. All these, the manifestations of tamas, will ensure that we are in a state of delusion all the time. Tadagrecha anubandhecha. Agrecha anubandhecha. At the beginning, at the end. Both at the end and the beginning. Sukham mohanam atmanaha, he says. Mohanam, delusory sukha. We think it is misery, but that misery itself is pleasurable. We can wonder, is it really possible? But that's exactly what we are doing. When we indulge in any activity which is oblivious of reality, now, we may all think, possibly we don't indulge in activities to experience tamasic sukha, but all the time when we are oblivious of reality, and one dimension of reality that we are oblivious of is the four-letter word time. Time is ticking, and most often when we do our day-to-day activities, we are oblivious. We ignore, we are careless, we are reckless. Every good that needs to be done is postponed conveniently. We recklessly postpone the priorities in life and engage in everything which is not priority. All that we need to do is a simple exercise every day. If we list down all the things that we did that day and see how many activities actually contributed taking one step towards the priority of life, it would be alarming. So therefore, sleep, sloth, indolence, intoxication may seem very harsh words. We may even look around and say, maybe not applicable to us, but in many ways, we are indulgent when it comes to excess of sleep. When we say sleep, daydreaming is also included in sleep. And daydreaming, sleeping, postponing, procrastination, laziness, not just physical laziness, mental laziness, carelessness, recklessness. When we say careless and recklessness, at the extreme, obviously, is doing something very rash, going and hitting the wall. But we are hitting the wall all the time when we are postponing what is priority in life. Pramada, intoxication. Are we intoxicated or not? Question to be asked. We may say only the alcoholics are intoxicated, only those who smoke are intoxicated, the drug addicts are intoxicated. Yes, they are intoxicated. We are also intoxicated. Addiction is not just for drugs, alcohols, and things like that. We are addicted to our own selfish desires, addicted to things which prevent us moving in the right direction in life. We need to examine our own addictions and see how we can come out of this intoxication. Now, therefore, tamasic sukha is the worst kind of sukha. Pleasurable misery. Misery which we think is pleasurable. We all have heard this famous analogy, right? This story of this man. This man is running in the forest. There is a tiger which is chasing this man. He is running and the tiger is chasing him. He slips and falls in a well, a deep well, and he holds on to a branch and he's hanging. He's hanging, and deep inside the well are thousands of poisonous cobras, all ready, opening their mouth and ready to swallow and bite and swallow. So therefore he cannot jump in. This tiger is actually waiting outside. This man is holding on to this branch of a tree. The branch of a tree is so feeble, so fragile, it will break any moment. And on top of it, there is a mongoose which is coming all the way on the branch to bite this man any time. And from the tree, there is a beehive and there is a drop of honey that falls. And accidentally, that drop of honey falls on his lip. And he tastes that honey. He says, Paramasukha, Paramasukha. What happiness. Unfortunately, that's the kind of sukha that we are experiencing. So Krishna, by analyzing sukha threefold, clearly highlights the importance of cultivating sattva guna. So when we now come back, we will re-look at this entire analysis that Krishna has done. Action and the outcome of action, and then look at end to end the necessity for sattva and how cultivation of sattva helps us perform right and successful actions. The answer to the driving question of Gita. What is my dharma? What is the right action? What is a successful action? And when we go back and revisit what we have discussed over the last several weeks and see the big picture connecting all the dots, it becomes crystal clear to us as to why, how and what. So we will see answers to all the three. And then we will transition to the next important phase of the Gita, Varna Dharma. We're going to spend a few weeks on Varna Dharma. So therefore I encourage each and everyone to spread the word around. It's important that more people attend those sessions on Varna Dharma, because those shlokas and Varna Dharma will put to rest every possible question that we may have. All the doubts, all the misgivings will be categorically clarified by Krishna. We will take that session after we finish the summary of the art and science of successful action. Sarvam Sri Krishna.